a video really quickly, if that's okay with everyone. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm really excited to see you all and to hear from GARD. My name is Chelsea Boodoo. I am a global GARD coordinator, and I would just like to acknowledge our sponsors. So share my video really share this sponsorship video. Moderating your session today will be Dr. Eric McLemore from Clemson University. Thank you so much, Eric, for moderating this session, and I'll let you take it from here. Let me know if you need anything.
Thanks so much, Chelsea, for all your hard work. Thanks to everyone for attending our North American session here today. We have three very exciting speakers we're really excited to hear from. I'll try to keep my intros a little bit short so we can hear from the speakers. But I want to start with introducing our first speaker, giving a talk titled From Bog to Bedside, a personal perspective on the potential of phage therapy to address AMR. And our speaker we're delighted to welcome this afternoon, if you're on the East Coast, is Dr. Stephanie Strathby. She's an infectious disease epidemiologist and Associate Dean of Global Health Sciences and Harold Simon Distinguished Professor. Oh no, pardon me. Okay, my computer's flipping back and forth. Pardon me for a moment here. Screens are unhappy. Excuse me. At University of California, San Diego, Dr. Strathby also holds adjunct professor positions at Johns Hopkins and Simon Fraser universities. I'm going to pause there and pass to Dr. Strathby so that we can jump into her talk. Without further ado, welcome and thank you very much for this wonderful talk.
Thank you very much. I really welcome the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm going to be talking a little bit about my family's personal story that inadvertently led to a reinvigorated interest in phage therapy to deal with the AMR crisis. So first, a couple of disclosures. My husband and I hold stock in a phage company, Adaptive Phage Therapeutics. I'm not going to be talking about any companies today. I'm an unpaid advisor to another phage company, Felix Biosciences. All patient photos today are used with permission and a land attribution to the Kamieh unceded land that I work on. So our story started when my husband and I were on vacation in November of 2015 in Egypt. It was the last night of our trip. We were on a cruise ship. We'd had this lovely meal, and all of a sudden he got violently ill. I thought he had just had food poisoning, but he ended up getting very ill. They did not have a hospital. He was admitted to a clinic where they luckily had a CT scan, and they were able to diagnose pancreatitis. And whatever they saw on this CT scan made them worried enough that they helped us get medevaced first to Germany, where they stabilized him and had us in full PPE. And I thought this was just a precaution. But it turned out that Tom had a gallstone that blocked his bile duct and it caused a giant abscess the size of a small football to grow in his abdomen. And they cultured the fluid, which was dark and putrid from this abscess. And unfortunately, it came back as Acinetobacter baumannii. And for those of you that are following AMR, this is one of the escape pathogens where every letter in escape, spelled ESKAPE, stands for a different superbug that is of threat to human health. And this is the A in escape. It alarmed the physicians, and it shocked me because this was an organism I used to plate on my Petri dishes back at the University of Toronto when I was a student in the 1980s, and it was considered to be a pretty wimpy organism. But over the years, it's gained superpowers as a superbug, and it's most commonly associated with hospitals. My husband's was an Egyptian strain, so we don't know where he acquired it, but somewhere in Egypt. But he'd already been walking around with this abscess that made a nice little apartment building for this superbug to move into. The German physicians did the exact right thing. They did what's called an antibiogram that tells the antibiotic susceptibility profile of the organism. And I don't understand German, and maybe you don't either, but you don't have to. You see that in this chart, almost every different antibiotic that was tested, it was resistant to. It was only partially sensitive to 3, and these are heavy-duty antibiotics like meropenem and colistin. Now, Tom was stabilized and medevaced home to San Diego because it was thought that his illness was going to be prolonged, but I had no idea how long he was going to be in the hospital. And it was pretty clear that my colleagues who were treating him at the University of California, San Diego, didn't even know if he was going to live or die. He was too weak for surgery, so they put catheters in his abdomen to try to siphon off all the infected fluid. And unfortunately, this organism kept spreading. And by this time, it had become pan-resistant. So it became resistant in just a couple of weeks to the last few remaining antibiotics. And now you can see this photo. He's on a trach vent, so that he's on the ventilator to keep his lungs working. He's on 3 different medications to keep his heart working. And now his kidneys are starting to fail. And the doctors asked me if he wanted to live. Of course, this was one of the most horrible experiences you could ever imagine having. And I didn't even know if Tom could hear me, but I asked him to squeeze my hand if he wanted to live. And he squeezed my hand. Well, I was elated, but I was terrified because I'm not a physician. I'm a PhD, and this is not my area at all. But I went home and I hit the internet, and I found a paper that was buried called, emerging therapies for multi-drug resistant Acinetobacter baumannii. And buried in this was something called phage therapy, or bacteriophage therapy, phage for short. Now, I knew what phage were because I have this rusty old degree in microbiology from the 1980s, but I didn't ever know that they could be used to treat bacterial infections. And it turns out that they have a very interesting and strange history. Phage activity was observed on the shores of the Ganges and Jumuna River in India as early as 1896 by a British physician, Ernest Hankin. And he wasn't sure what he was looking at, but he saw this bacteriolytic activity that was able to kill cholera bacteria. This kind of experiment was repeated by Russian scientists, Polish scientists, and another Brit, Frederick Twort. And again, nobody deduced that this could be a virus that attacks bacteria until Félix de Harel repeated this experiment in 1917. And the filtrate from fecal matter of children who were dying of dysentery was passed through a Pasteur filter that weeds out, filters out bacteria. And that filtrate was still able to kill the bacteria. And so he deduced that whatever this was had to be smaller than a bacterium and had to be a parasite of bacterium. So he called it bacteriophage, derived from the Greek meaning bacteria eater. Well, Félix helped Georgi Iliava, shown on this slide, set up what became the first phage therapy center in the world in the late 1930s in what is now the Republic of Georgia. And in Georgia and in Poland, they have been offering phage therapy to patients for decades. It's just that this had been forgotten in the West. And part of the reason for that is because penicillin came on the scene in World War II, and it was really a game changer. And phage have to be matched specifically to bacteria. So the West decided to put all their eggs in one basket with antibiotics, and parts of Eastern Europe continued to use phages, but the West did not. There's more to that story, but that maybe there's time for discussion. But it wasn't until 1942 or so that the electron microscope was developed in Germany, and we could see phages for the first time. Now, this is a modern day scanning electron micrograph, blowing up 100,000 times. In orange is a bacterium that's stained, and in green, those are stained phages that are attacking the bacterium. Now, they attach to a receptor if it is a match for them, and they drill into that bacterial cell wall and inject their genetic material, usually DNA, and that bacterium is turned into a phage manufacturing plant. It's somewhat of a zombie. And those baby phages are assembled, and when given the kill signal, they burst out, killing the bacterial cell. And 100 to 300 phages are manufactured each time this happens. And then those baby phages or virions go and attack new bacteria, as long as there's bacteria that they match to. If they don't find any bacteria that they match to, they're eliminated by the body in its natural filtration through largely the liver and the spleen. Now, we know that phages are the oldest and most populous organism on the planet. They have actually coexisted with bacteria for almost 4 billion years, and they come in all shapes and sizes. They're in water, they're in soil, they're inside our bodies as part of our microbiome, keeping our bacterial numbers in check. So of course, the question I wanted to know was, could we use phage therapy to cure Tom? Well, I reached out to total strangers after being given the go-ahead by my colleagues at UC San Diego, who said, if you can find phages that are a match for his bacterium, then, we'll call the FDA and see if they'll give us permission. And a total stranger reached out in response to my plea for help. And this was Dr. Ryland Young from Texas A&M University, who turned his lab into a command center. And he reached out to people all over the world asking if they had any Acinetobacter baumannii phages to send to them. They would screen it against Tom's bacterial isolate, and in the meantime that they would go to environmental samples to see if they could find any phages of their own. And of course, this meant sewage and barnyard waste and all sorts of gnarly samples, because wherever you find a lot of bacteria, you find their perfect predator, phages, that will attack them. So the woman with the necklace is Dr. Adriana Carolina Hernandez. She was a PhD student at the time. She slept in the laboratory, believe it or not, and she found 4 phages that were a match. Well, everyone was very excited, and my colleague, Dr. Chip Schooley, called the FDA and got permission to go forward. But they said, there's the Army and the Navy that have been working on this, and maybe they'll help too. Now, the Army said, no, we're not going to get involved in the care of a civilian. But Lieutenant Commander Theron Hamilton, shown here, said, you know what, if you send me his bacterial isolate, we've got about 100 of these A. baumannii phages in our library that have only been tested on rabbits and mice and, a few rats, and we'll see if any are a match for Tom. And if they are, I have to go up the chain to the admirals to get permission to use them. But better to ask for forgiveness than for permission. I'll see what we have. Now, he turned to the phage whisperer, Dr. Biswajit Biswas, who's on the right-hand side of this slide. And Biswajit also found 4 phages that were a match, and one that was a super killer phage. So now we had these 2 cocktails, and all in the span of about 3 weeks' time. Meanwhile, Dr. Schooley, who's pictured in the middle, had this terrible dilemma because he'd never dealt with phage ever before in a clinical case, especially one that was emergency like this, and a friend of his. He needed to find out how much phage to administer, what routes of administration, how often, how long. And to be honest, we still don't know the answer to these questions. So this was the best guess. He reached out to Dr. Maya Mirabishvili, who had been trained at the Ilyava Center in Georgia and was now in Brussels. And she advised on the dosing into the catheters in his abdomen. He also got advice from Dr. Carl Merrill, who was a retired NIH researcher who had worked on phage for a good part of his career. And he said, Dr. Schooley, you have to treat this patient intravenously. I strongly advise, because if you just sprinkle this phage and, or put it in the catheters, if there's a hidden reservoir of bacteria that the phage don't reach, it could become resistant very quickly. So we were convinced that that's what we needed to do. And so we were able to get this EIND, which stands for Emergency Investigational New Drug, from the FDA. And they were super helpful. The dose that was decided on was 10 to the 9 PFU per mil, or that's like 1 billion phages per dose every 2 hours. So I was terrified. I didn't know if this was going to cure him or kill him. But he was clearly very, very ill. This is what he looked like the day that we started phage therapy, which was almost exactly 7 years ago to this day. He was not responding to any signs. He was thought to be within hours of dying, and I signed the consent form for kidney dialysis the day that we started phage therapy. This is the team, Dr. Schooley and Dr. Taplitz, among many others. They're smiling for the camera because they knew they were making medical history. Tom appears to be the first patient in the US with a systemic superbug infection that was treated with intravenous phage therapy. And so first we took the Texas phages and put those into the catheters in his abdomen because we thought that's the safest place to start. And if he survives that, we'll put the Navy phages into his bloodstream. And he was stable enough that that happened a few days later. And lo and behold, he woke up from a coma 3 days after that, lifted his head off the pillow and kissed his daughter's hand. Well, nobody was expecting this kind of turnaround. It was really miraculous. He obviously had, a long way to go in his recovery. They're losing 100 pounds and all of his muscle mass. He had to learn how to talk, how to walk, everything again. But he left the hospital 9 months after our ordeal began. And I never dreamed that this case would make medical history. And it was presented at the 100th anniversary of the discovery of the bacteriophage in April 2017, so a year after he was treated and cured. And after that, it went viral on the internet, and in a good way. We got calls from patients all over the world. The first one was a patient in China. And of course, total strangers had stepped up to the plate to save my husband. So I felt like I had to do the same. So we tried to do as much as we could for patients. Sometimes we were successful, sometimes we weren't. You're going to hear next from another patient that we tried to help. This story was also picked up by the medical journals like JAMA and Lancet, who commissioned commentaries and Q&As. Our chancellor at UC San Diego was so impressed with the success that we had treating other patients with phage therapy that he gave us seed funding to start what became the first dedicated phage therapy center in North America, the Center for Innovative Phage Applications and Therapeutics, or IPATH. The day that we opened in June of 2018, Science magazine published a commentary where it was said that this was a game changer for the field. Since then, our team and many teams around the world have been revitalized in terms of their interest in phage therapy, and several case reports and case series have been published with different kinds of superbugs, different kinds of clinical conditions, and different routes of administration. And they haven't all been successful because almost all of these patients are near death, and that's the only way that they can obtain this. It's still considered experimental treatment in the West, but of course in the East, many countries have been using it for decades. One of the most exciting cases that's happened since my husband's is the case of Isabel Carnell Holdaway. She was the first human to receive genetically engineered bacteriophage in a cocktail. And these phages were used to treat a disseminated case of Mycobacterium abscessus, which is a cousin to tuberculosis. She was in hospice when she received her phage, and it was modeled on the protocol of my husband. So she was injected with the phage and received it intravenously. And she left the hospital within a week. She had an extra 3 years of life. Some of that was still, where she was very ill, but she was able to go back to school, get a part-time job, learn how to drive, and we became very good friends. Unfortunately, she passed away just about a year ago from her underlying conditions, but her case was really a landmark because it means that genetically modified phage can be used to improve upon the phage lifestyle and to make phage better killers. And if this could be done for tuberculosis, that would be a game changer. That's the most serious bacterial pathogen that kills almost 2 million people per year around the world. Now, at IPATH, it hasn't all been rosy. We've had over 1,700 requests for phage therapy since we opened. The majority of these people are not clinically indicated for phage therapy because they still have antibiotic options, but it does show you the demand. A phage hunt was recommended by physicians in 343 cases, initiated in 281 cases. Lytic phage, or the phage rage kind that you want to use for phage therapy, was found in 140 cases, but we've only been able to treat 17% of cases because Sometimes we can't find phage in time to help the patient. Now, how do we solve that problem? Well, what we really need to do is build a phage library. There's lots of little libraries around the world that have different phage to kill different kinds of bacterial pathogens, but they're not coordinated in a way that they can be accessed very easily. And so it's like having a million keys scattered around the world and a million locks scattered around the world, and you don't know which key matches which lock. So what you really want to have are phage that are already identified from, environmental samples and characterized and sequenced, and you know what receptor they hit, and you know what phage they go along with. So this is one of our biggest needs right now in the field. And I know that there's several teams around the world that are working on this, and I'm hoping that we'll all be able to work together because this is a global health problem. Also, what's needed in the field is to advance clinical trials for phage therapy. Several are underway. The NIH has supported its first clinical trials. The first one, an intravenous phage therapy program, phage therapy protocol, began with the partnership through the Antimicrobial Resistance Leadership Group, which is the network of research institutions around the US that have been focused on trying to find solutions to antimicrobial resistance. This is the first time that they've embarked upon phage therapy, and this adaptive trial is being led by my colleague Dr. Schooley and Dr. Pranita Tama from Johns Hopkins, and is enrolling now. So it's focused on cystic fibrosis patients with chronic Pseudomonas aeruginosa infections that aren't serious enough to warrant antibiotic use, so that we can see how phages behave in the absence of antibiotics. And it's progressing nicely. Before I close, I want to make it clear that phage can be applied in a number of different directions outside of medicine. This figure comes from a paper that my colleagues and I recently published in the journal Cell. And it really shows that phage can be taken from a One Health perspective. And of course, we know that the One Health conceptual framework is the interface between humans, animals, and the environment. But see, phage could be used as a vector to deliver therapeutics like vaccines or cancer drugs. It could be used as prophylaxis during outbreaks. It can even respond potentially to current outbreaks. There, as you may be aware, there's an outbreak of very multi-drug resistant Pseudomonas aeruginosa associated with contaminated eye drops. It's affected 68 patients. There's been several deaths, and others have lost their eyes. And we at IPATH recently identified phage that are active against at least one of the isolates involved in this outbreak. So if you know of any patients that require it, they can contact us at IPATH. We also could see the potential of phage to be used in biodefense or grooming the microbiome. It could be used in food safety. It could be used to disinfect wastewater or to replace antibiotics in agriculture and aquaculture. And of course, it could also be used in veterinary treatment or to replace antibiotics in livestock. So as you can see, there's a lot of potential for phage applications outside of medicine. And I hope all of you are inspired by this to think of other applications as well, because antibiotics alone are not going to be enough to get us out of the crisis that we're facing. I'm going to close now, and I want to thank a number of collaborators that we have at IPATH. We work very closely with other phage therapy programs that now exist at Yale, Baylor, and the Mayo Clinic. We also partner now with Walter Reed and even phage centers around the world. And we've received support from the Mallory Smith Legacy Fund, Emily's Entourage, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, and NIH. And of course, me personally, I have to thank a global village of people that were stepped up to save the life of a stranger. It really puts the word kind and humankind. But I think for this audience, it shows the potential for creative collaboration to be able to address AMR, and that's what we need. In fact, my husband and I were so privileged that we were able to get the help that we need, that we decided to write a book about our story called The Perfect Predator, a scientist's race to save her husband from a deadly superbug. If you want to learn more about that, you could go to theperfectpredator.com. And I'll just close there and see if there's time for any questions. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Strathy. Please, if you're able, please use your reaction button and we can give a virtual round of applause to Dr. Strathy for a great talk. I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions from the audience, if you'd like to place in the chat box. If you're not able to ask your question directly. If not, we have one Q&A from the Whova platform that I can bring to Dr. Strathy. Give you just a few seconds if you have any questions. Okay, not seeing any in the platform or chat. I do see one coming from Chelsea. Thank you. I'll get to that in just a moment. Let me pivot to the question in the Whova platform, Dr. Strathy, and the questioner is asking you about the current state of mechanisms for phage therapy in combating AMR. I think the context of the question could be something related to whether there's an update to the intravenous example that you talked about, or if that's where we currently are in terms of the mechanism.
By mechanism, I was thinking that what was meant by how do phages work to kill the bacteria. So it could mean that you have a single phage that you use to resensitize bacteria to antibiotics that it was previously resistant to. That's been done, especially by the Yale group. Or you could use phage in a cocktail, like several phages that hit different receptors to try to kill the phage, kill the bacteria directly. So there's both an indirect and a direct mechanism. But your point being, what routes of administration are the best to use? Well, it really does seem to depend on the clinical condition. If someone has a pneumonia, for example, you might consider using a nebulizer to allow them to inhale a phage product. However, for some patients, say with cystic fibrosis, that can irritate their lung passages, their airways. And so it may be better to go intravenous. At IPATH, we treat almost all of our patients intravenously because we haven't seen any safety concerns. However, if someone has a diabetic like foot ulcer, putting it on the skin may be appropriate. So we need to do more studies to really see which routes of administration are ideal for which kinds of conditions, because they're not all the same. And each of these different superbug infections might require different approaches as well.
Thank you, Dr. Strathy. It's amazing to hear your insights in terms of how rapidly this field has progressed and the breadth and depth of where we're at with phage therapy. There is one more question coming in from the audience that I want to read here from Regina. And this question is, can you speak a little bit to any immune system responses to phage therapy and how that has affected?
Sure. Well, the overriding concern that you would have with phage therapy is whether or not it would trigger septic shock. And that's an overreaction of the immune system to an invader. And we were certainly worried about that in Tom's case, which is why a whole extra week was spent scrubbing the phage preparation of endotoxin, which is essentially the lipopolysaccharide layer of the bacterial cell wall of a gram-negative bacterium like Acinetobacter baumannii. So there were no real guidelines except from the FDA. They said that we should try for a target of 5 endotoxin units per kilogram per hour based on the weight of the patient. And so that's what we used, and we did not see any sign of sepsis. That threshold has been used ever since. And of course, some teams don't have the ability to remove endotoxin. There are different ways to do it depending on the organism, but that's the biggest concern. There also can be antibodies that are developed against phage. These have been observed in some cases. In many cases, however, they don't seem to interfere with the clinical outcome. So just because antibodies are there doesn't mean that they could cause a problem. However, it's always a good idea to test for antibodies that may be pre-existing prior to initiating phage therapy. therapy, but sometimes there isn't time to do that because obviously that isn't a standard test. So I'll stop there, but we haven't seen any real safety concerns associated with phage therapy, which is why the FDA has never turned us down for a request.
Yeah, that's amazing. You were able to get those emergency authorizations. Thank you again so much, Dr. Shrathi. This is just really interesting and compelling. And thank you to everyone who attended. I hope you have in your schedule time to stick around for our next two speakers. I'm going to, again, please use your reaction button and thank Dr. Shrathi. I'm going to pivot to introducing the next speaker.
Thanks so much. Anyone who didn't get a question answered can email me. I'll put my email in the chat.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, so moving to our next speaker in the North American GARD session today, we're really excited to hear from Diane Shader-Smith. Her talk is titled Salt in My Soul, AMR Advocacy and the Power of Words. Ms. Smith is a writer, publicist, and cystic fibrosis advocate. She's written for ABC TV series General Hospital, you may be familiar with, as well as KISS Radio Los Angeles, and worked in really interesting spaces out in Los Angeles, such as working with the Beverly Hills Hotel, Microsoft, and worked on award-winning films such as The Passion for the Christ. Ms. Smith lives in Los Angeles with her husband, Mark, and her son, Micah. Her daughter, Mallory Smith, passed away in 2017, unfortunately, and is author of the book Salt in My Soul, An Unfinished Life. So we're really excited to hear Ms. Smith's story and have her here with us. Are you able to share your screen, Diane? Let me just, we can't hear your audio, at least I can.
Good morning. Yeah,
There
good
we go.
morning.
Great.
First, I wanted to say a thank you to Stephanie because she is the one who introduced me to your group. So thank you. And also, she features in my story, so you will hear her role, and it was quite an important one. So I'm going to put myself on hide. I'm going to hide myself because I am going to give 192 slides in 25 minutes. It's a very fast moving presentation. It's all visual, and I want you to focus on the slides and not me. So here we go. Okay, we ready? Can you see me and hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. AMR, antimicrobial resistance. A ticking time bomb, a catastrophic health threat considered by the World Health Organization to be one of the 10 most important global health problems. The Lancet Medical Journal reports that AMR killed 1.3 million people and contributed to 5 million deaths in 2019. Richard Alm, who's the chief scientist for Carbex, gives us another way to think about this. He says that it's equivalent to a 747 packed with passengers crashing every 39 minutes. Governments would never tolerate this, but for some reason, we are ignoring deaths from AMR. The crazy thing is that this is not a new problem. Alexander Fleming, in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech in 1945, issued a warning that AMR was coming for us. The problem is we didn't listen, and now we're losing the battle against bacteria and fungus. Thought leaders have been trying to get this on people's radar for quite some time, but it has not penetrated the American consciousness and the global consciousness the way it needs to. We need an aha moment with AMR, the moment we understand how many lives are at stake, but that will not happen until we address a huge problem, what I call the alphabet soup of acronyms. People in this industry, the medical world, refer to it as AMR, antimicrobial resistance, AR, antibiotic resistance, DRI, drug-resistant infections, DR, drug resistance, MDR, multiply drug-resistant, superbugs, and sepsis. Our brains need clear concepts to make sense of all of this. I am urging leaders every time I speak to agree on a name so that we are all using the same language. Cancer is a word that refers to any one of a large number of diseases. You say the word cancer and people get it. That is not the case with AMR. Another important tool that will help raise awareness for all this is storytelling, because there is so much that can be learned through the voices and experiences of people living with and dying from AMR. Take Tom Patterson, for example, much more so than through the details of a particular strain of bacteria. They are as diverse as they are misunderstood. My interest in all this started when I was a young working mom. My daughter Mallory was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. It was heartbreaking and traumatic. How do you tell your 3-year-old that she will have to do daily treatments that involve inhaling multiple medications and also chest percussion therapy to dislodge the mucus? There was no children's book back then to explain it to Mallory, to her brother Micah, and to our community. So I wrote one. It's called Mallory's 65 Roses, because 65 roses is what kids hear when adults say cystic fibrosis. This book taught Mallory the power of narrative. Once Mallory got used to treatment, compliance was not an issue until one day when she refused to do them anymore. We explained that resistant bacteria can be fatal and that daily therapy wasn't optional. She listened carefully and then she ran out of the room crying. Mallory did not speak to us for 3 days, but after that, she never missed a treatment. And she started writing in a diary. My daughter had a really happy childhood with no significant health challenges until she was colonized by Burkholderia caenocepacia, bacteria known for its resistance. Her doctor said this would change the trajectory of her life. All I heard was that my daughter had an expiration date. It was hard to process, hard to stay positive, so I developed a mantra: no pity party. Mallory went on to adopt her own, which was Live Happy. Middle school was not problematic, but high school was another story. Mallory was in and out of the hospital, each time needing IV antibiotics for weeks to months, which led to resistance. But despite her health challenges, she was a pretty typical high-achieving teenager, family-oriented, a straight-A student, and a 3-sport varsity athlete. Second half of senior year, she got very sick. And of this time, she writes, as the days wear on, I find myself panicking as I grow more oxygen dependent, experiencing pain with breathing, no longer able to walk without help. But outside of the hospital, life goes on. Even if I do get out in time for the prom, I won't be able to find a date. So I asked her water polo coach, Rob Bowie, who's pictured here, to see if he could help. And the very next day, Dylan, the boy Mallory had a crush on, walked in with flowers, which motivated Mallory to work hard to get her strength back. To her surprise, she was voted prom queen, and it was an incredible evening until the after party when some knucklehead threw a smoke bomb into the venue. Mallory's throat started to burn, her lungs were searing, her eyes and her nose were watering, and then hemoptysis, when the airways bleed. Mallory writes of this experience, each time it happens, I wonder if this will be the time when the blood spilling up my lungs and out my mouth will burst forth so fast that I can't breathe. The time my hemoptysis isn't just a scare, but the final, swift, deadly bullet. Terrifying moments like this had distilled for Mallory a profound understanding of how precarious life was. It's why she felt the need to document everything, to collect the wisps, the threads of her untidy happenings. These are her words. With time, I grow decreasingly confident in the plans that I had etched in my mental map until it's hard to remember they were ever there. I am working very hard to see beauty in a life that looks quite different from the one I wanted and the one I expected. Mallory was finding her voice and she wanted to use it. In her high school graduation speech, she quotes the universally respected English philosopher, Winnie the Pooh. I used to believe in forever, but forever was too good to be true. Words she chose for their relevance to her classmates, but that also had a private meaning, inspired by what she refers to as the dark voices in my head, the brokers of hopelessness. No one understood Mallory's distress because she still looked so healthy that everybody just thought she was the golden girl who had it all. She would have traded everything for the chance to take a breath that didn't hurt, to have a life that wasn't defined by illness. College presented new challenges. After growing up with a helicopter mom, Mallory was ready to be on her own, but it was quite a difficult transition. And she writes about the duck syndrome, when patients are like ducks gliding on the water, students as well. What no one sees is that underneath they are paddling furiously. The stress of working to make things seem effortless creates a vicious cycle of silence and struggle. Over time, she adjusted, but along the way, there would be many more hospitalizations. With each admission, Mallory's medical teams would come to her room to talk through the treatment plan after they started her on a cocktail of IVs. Routinely in this order, cultures were taken, antibiotics were prescribed, drug susceptibility tests were performed, cocktails were altered. This leads to resistance. Faster diagnostics would have staved off this issue, another important part of antibiotic stewardship. Over time, the bacteria got thicker, stickier, and increasingly more resistant. As Mallory's body deteriorated, she sharpened her mind, crystallized her thinking, and honed her writing skills, creating poetry out of prosaic experience in thousands of pages of private journal entries. Straddling the sick and the well worlds, Mallory understood that amplifying patient voices could have implications for society, which is why she spent 10 years documenting what it was like to live with resistant bacteria that was a known killer. Lyrics from Hamilton resonate. Why do you write like you're running out of time? In hindsight, it's clear Mallory knew she was. Her words, I am limited in what I can do, but not in what I can say. Resistant bacteria does a lot of taking, of dreams, of time, of travel, of friendships, of freedom, of potential, of plans, of lives. It's a complex, unpredictable, irreversible, progressive, painful, suffocating, choking weed. When I developed a fungal infection, things got even more complicated and emotionally traumatic. I used to have fun, be fun. Now I'm afraid of everything, of being myself, but also losing who I am, that the choices I make are going to cut my life short. I'm going to be on IVs for the rest of my life, and it's very hard on the liver. I'm afraid that I won't be happy. I won't have friends or a significant other. And sex with a PICC line or an IV drip? Ugh. I am afraid I'll always just be that sick girl. And yet Mallory persevered, graduating from Stanford Phi Beta Kappa and writing her first book, The Gottlieb Native Garden, A California Love Story. It's about the need to use native plants to restore biodiversity. It's about the intersection of human and environmental health. New Year's Eve 2015, Mallory met Jack, who I call her real-life Prince Charming. But after they got together, Mallory was back in the hospital. The antibiotics had stopped working. The only option left was transplant. The problem is that our insurance company denied coverage. The battle raged for weeks. They employed multiple stall tactics that Mallory felt were intended to run out the clock on her life. We needed a miracle. Eventually, Mallory was approved, but only because we knew someone who knew someone. Skewed social and economic policies and care practices made things easier for Mallory than for many others. She did not want to accept the evaluation because she felt guilty that others had not been as lucky. I urged her to use her privilege, her access, and the power of the pen to expose this injustice, which she did. The approval meant a cross-country move since UPMC was the only center willing to take on her complicated case. Mallory had to say goodbye to everybody, knowing she might not make it back. There were so many tears. But Mallory was happy and hopeful when she arrived. As the days and the weeks passed, her excitement gave way to hopelessness because she started to feel like the call would never come, the call for new lungs. Or if it did come, it would come too late. So at that point, I changed my mantra to somewhere over the rainbow, there are lungs. Those were long, hard days. Mallory struggled to breathe, struggled to stay hopeful. She worried that her bacteria would kill her before new lungs arrived, that she would end up in the ICU clinging to life. If that happens, she writes, I want to be as comfortable as possible through opioids or anti-anxiety meds, but not be so out of it that I'm unconscious unless the pain is severe enough to necessitate that. I want to maintain dignity to whatever extent possible, to receive whatever life-saving tactic is appropriate, to be able to communicate in some way, to have the blinds open for natural light, to have calming music to listen to have my mom or dad with me always. I want to live. The call for lungs did finally come, but it was a false alarm. And Mallory describes in vivid detail the ticking time bomb, her fraying emotions, her unraveling nerves. Many months later, the fourth call was a go. Despite her fears, Mallory was so excited to receive the gift of life. Move on. Oh, so sorry. The recovery was grueling, excruciating, but 1 month later, Mallory was celebrating her 25th birthday. It was the happiest time as we dared to dream about a new life. But just a few weeks later, the Sapesha was back. Mallory was out of options. Mark was not willing to accept that. And it was at this point that he went in search of phage therapy, as you just heard about, what we call a promising treatment that was all but abandoned when penicillin was discovered. Penicillin could get patent protection while phages could not. Mark asked epidemiologist Stephanie Strathley, who you just heard from, because she had used phages to save her husband to help. She turned to Twitter and she sent out this tweet pleading to researchers around the globe. Meanwhile, at the doctor's urging, our closest friends and family flew across the country to be with us. Because Mallory was on a ventilator, she scribbled this note, which reads, "Can't talk at all, but so grateful you are all here for the hardest part." During this time, the United States Navy was quietly working on a treatment for an invisible enemy that they called Iraqi Bacter, resistant bacteria causing serious infections to military personnel wounded in battle. Herculean efforts enabled Stephanie, the United States Navy, and APT to prepare and deliver a phage match for Mallory's isolate of Sapesha. That night, Mallory became the first patient in the United States with cystic fibrosis to receive phage therapy under the FDA compassionate use provision. But the very next morning, Mallory's doctor said she had been without oxygen for too long and advised us to make the gut-wrenching decision to remove life support. Saying goodbye to Mallory was impossible. Life as I knew it was over. But then the autopsy report from the Navy came back, revealing that the phages had started to work. Mallory just didn't get them in time. Mark could not save his daughter, but he was certain phage therapy could save others. So we shared Mallory's story with the media, urged the medical community to take a closer look at phages, and raised money to make the inaugural grant to Stephanie's group at IPATH, which is leading the first NIH-funded trial using phage therapy. Meanwhile, Mark went dipping for phages in a sewage treatment plant, and I turned to Mallory's journal and found 2,500 pages of her reflections over 10 years. I worked with Random House to have Mallory's writings published posthumously as Salt in My Soul, which led to the documentary of the same name. Was it fate or divine intervention when the Lancet Medical Journal published the largest study to date about superbugs on the same day the New York Times referred to Salt in My Soul as an awareness-raising tool about the possibilities of bacteriophages? And then Forbes writer Judy Stone penned the headline, "Poignant Film Calls Attention to the Need for Antibiotic Resistant to Look Further into Phages." Since Mallory isn't here to share her hard-fought insights or her story, I am using her words to raise awareness for the AMR crisis, speaking to every audience I can: medical schools, conferences, corporations, Capitol Hill, the White House, the UK, and most recently Australia, where they are currently using phages to treat resistant bacteria. In so doing this work, I have come to understand that we are dangerously close to a post-antibiotic era. There is a way to fix this, Kevin Outerson, the executive director of Carbex, says the science to address AMR is extraordinary. It's the business model that's broken, both in the United States and abroad. He explained that a collapse in the drug pipeline and the lack of state-of-the-art diagnostics at the same time superbugs are proving to be a formidable enemy has led to many governments, drug companies, medical researchers collaborating on a global revival of antibiotics, antifungals, phage therapy, and better diagnostics. But it's just not enough. AMR is a worldwide problem that jeopardizes the core of modern medicine and puts every nation at risk. Why? The Russo-Ukrainian war has reintroduced international conflict as an ever-present threat, which leads to widespread transmission of superbugs as they leave the battlefield and make their way into civil society. Resistance doesn't recognize borders. Vulnerable populations are growing with damaged or overstretched healthcare systems contributing to the spread of superbugs. Climate change will make things worse in terms of AMR. And of course, access is also an issue. Any conversation about medicines these days must address the gaps in our healthcare system. In theory, health equity means increasing opportunities for everyone to live the healthiest life possible with access to care, no matter who we are, where we live, or how much we make. In practice, it's quite different. To a patient with a superbug, to a parent of a child suffering from resistant bacteria, to a healthcare provider trying to save the life of someone with AMR, health equity has an additional meaning. It's the great divide between those blessed with good health and those who struggle to stay alive. To achieve health equity for this population, we need treatments that will work against resistant bacteria, faster diagnostics, antibiotic stewardship. Mallory was only 12 when AMR came for her and derailed her life. She had so much to live for. AMR was secondary to cystic fibrosis in Mallory's case, but it is what killed her. There is a human death toll to the dearth of effective treatments for AMR, to the dearth of faster and more targeted diagnostics that could help us preserve the current drugs in our arsenal. We think of lifespan in terms of the arc of human life, but antibiotics also have a lifespan, which is why we need to be more careful with how we deploy them. Mallory is just one of the many millions impacted by AMR. CF patients, those who have lost limbs, live with cancer, HIV, or are immune compromised, they're all at disproportionate risk, but no one is safe. Katie Granger was a perfectly healthy woman who got sepsis from a simple cut and had to have her fingers and her legs amputated. After speaking at the National Amputee Coalition Conference, I learned that it goes both ways, that amputees are at increased risk of bacterial infections and live with the tremendous fear of contracting one, at the same time that perfectly healthy people can get infections that lead to amputations. Desperate times call for creative solutions. Since statistics don't trigger empathy, we need to employ the power of story. We need to put a face to AMR the way Tom Hanks did for diabetes, Magic Johnson did for AIDS, and Angelina Jolie did for BRCA. Mallory didn't write for 10 years to be the face of AMR or to tackle a global health crisis. Will Battersby, the director of Salt in My Soul, the film, didn't adapt her memoir into a documentary to put the issue of AMR on the world stage. And yet, by putting a face to AMR, we are engaging audiences in important conversations to get this on the radar. Bringing a patient's words to life can trigger that aha moment, the transformation in perception that will make this crisis feel real and help people understand that deaths from AMR were and are preventable. I've come to understand that the low cost of antibiotics has blinded us as a society to the value of knowing what bug is causing our bodies to fail. We need to curb the evolution of drug-resistant bacteria. We need rapid tests that can identify the pathogen causing infection and their antibiotic susceptibilities. We need narrow spectrum antibiotics targeted to drug-resistant bacteria. We need phage therapy. and we need policy and incentives to support the appropriate use of all of this. Most of all, we need global awareness about the devastating public health threat that superbugs pose. AMR is not just coming for us, as Fleming warned, it's here. Mallory's death was preventable, since science told through story can change hearts, minds, and behaviors. I share hers to introduce this topic to so many. If there's time, I would be happy to share the 2-minute trailer we raised to create awareness for AMR, but if not, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Please, if you're able, please go to your reaction buttons and give a virtual round of applause for Diane's moving presentation. And there's certainly time, Diane, if you want to share that, please go ahead.
Okay, hold on, let me get it ready. I had the craziest thing happen. I had this talk for you and I lost the presentation and I was frantically trying to find it. So that kept me from getting this set up, but I will.
No worries. Take your time.
Okay. Okay, let me just. Okay, I'm gonna. Can you see now, everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here we go.
Things seem to be getting worse instead of better. It seems like I'm resistant to the antibiotics. I was colonized with Burkholderia caenocepacia, otherwise known as B. cepacia.
This germ is very resistant to antibiotic. Is the germ that we never want any CF patient to have.
We knew that life was going to be much harder and shorter. Her lung function was less than 30%.
It was necrotizing pneumonia that was going fast.
From the very beginning, I sensed that there was a lot of courage on Mallory's part, that she had a lot she wanted to live for. She wasn't done.
Every single decision that I make has a life or death significance to it.
She, took out her opinions and her feelings on her journal and then tried to just live a happy life.
I feel like people with CF are privy to secrets it takes most other people a lifetime to understand. How lucky we are to be alive. That we can leave behind a legacy when we go that will impact others. That simple things are often the most beautiful. That love and happiness are the most important things to strive for.
Thank you so much, Diane. I'm going to pivot to the audience to see if there are any questions. Please feel free to type in the chat, or if you'd like to use the Whova platform, I can keep an eye on that and try to make sure we get your questions to Diane. I'll give you just a few minutes to collect your thoughts and type up any questions. Give everyone just a moment, Diane.
No problem.
I'll insert my question. Okay, we have our first question from the audience here from Dr. Alasilha. So Benji says, thanks for sharing your story. One of the questions she asks is, can we pass on the story in the video to our colleagues?
Oh, yes, please do. Here, I'll put this in. I'll share, here's what I'll share. This will help.
Thank you
And
so
by the
much.
way, I should mention that all profits from sales of book and the film go to Mallory's Legacy Fund, which is not a family foundation because I wanted to keep it very clean. It's an independent public charity called the California Community Foundation. And it all goes, as you can see online, to AMR and phage therapy research specifically. Okay, am I sharing my screen now or no? Okay, so let me show you. So this is what you look for, and if you want to see it, you can look at the website and you can watch the trailer for the book, you can watch the trailer for the film, you can buy the book and you can watch the film. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so
Stop
much.
sharing. Oops. Stop sharing. There we go. Okay.
Any other questions from the audience? I do have a quick question while we're waiting. As an immune compromised patient myself, I'm very curious about your take on the intersection between mental health and the physical, for example, in my case, disability, and how you dealt with that as a family and how that might have changed in the face of AMR, or did it change?
I would absolutely say that there's a huge connection. And, you know, I talked about Mallory living happy, but, you know, I have to limit my talk. I could go on and on and on. But one of the most startling things to me was to find out how much she suffered, which, and it's funny, I don't know if it's in this trailer or the other trailer, because this is a trailer we created for AMR awareness, but there's just a regular film trailer to promote the film. And in it, her friend Talia says, you know, Mallory, and she says in the film, she took out her opinions and her feelings and put them into her journal and then went on to live a happy life. Because for her, she didn't want the world to pity her, but she had such, in me, it was horrifying to read. She suffered so much more than I knew. And we were joined at the hip. We were together all the time. But there is a huge connection for two reasons. First of all, I think as you watch the world passing you by and you see all your limitations, it makes it unfathomable to believe that you can't do those things. But the other thing is, you know, you have to make a choice. Are you going to have people view you as a sick person? Or are you going to have them not view you in light of your disability or illness or condition? And she made that decision. But I think then what happens is you bury it all and it has to come out somehow. And in Mallory's case, she wrote for 10 years. So there's a talk I do for the NAMI group, the National Alliance for Mental Illness. And I talk a lot about the mental health struggles and what she, you know, at one point she, and in the documentary, actually in the middle of the documentary, she talks about being diagnosed with depression. So yes, it's a very symbiotic relationship, physical and mental health. And anybody who says otherwise is just not in touch. I might have told you, oh, no, Mallory's fine when she was alive, but I realize now, no.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And that was a very moving moment for me, to hear her talk about the journal and her ability to keep things so positive. I just think it's really moving and captivating. So
Yeah,
thank
and actually, you would probably really benefit from the book. I mean, a lot of medical schools use the book to train physicians. Harvard does, and so do some others. And they say it's really helpful to hear in a patient's words. I mean, the reason I give talks is because Mallory's not here to speak for herself, but her words, she recorded for 10 years and she's considered to be a really excellent writer, and she captures all of it. And so I think you might find, I hear from a lot of patients who say they relate to her challenges.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to pause so that I don't dominate the questions and just make sure there are no more questions from the audience. You feel free to use your chat. You can also use the Huba platform. There's one there, but it might require a little bit of interpretation on my part. Okay, Vanji, please go ahead, Vanji.
A wonderful story. It was very touching. And thank you for the courage of sharing that. I was very encouraged by that. So moving forward, we are a Global Alliance for Rapid Diagnostics, and we're trying our best to develop tests biosensors for rapidly detecting antibiotic resistant bacteria. So based on your experience, where do you think are the gaps in terms of rapid diagnostics development?
Well, I'm not a doctor, so I can't speak to that on a global scale, but what I can say is the practice of prescribing antibiotics when people come into the emergency room and present with something, and then running the sensitivity tests and then changing the cocktail. My understanding is at that moment, faster diagnostics would help with the resistance problem. I think that's probably the single point that's most important to look at. You know, I actually gave a talk to bioMérieux, which they tell me is one of the largest diagnostics companies in the world, an international company. And I found that very interesting. I learned a lot about diagnostics. The first time I ever actually was even introduced to diagnostics as part of the whole equation was I was asked to give a presentation to the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine in DC last fall. I've been giving talks since 2019 and I never spoke about diagnostics, and they asked me to speak. And that's when I learned a little bit about the role diagnostics play. And in that talk, I actually talk about what happened early on with Mallory. How she was diagnosed was because I was pregnant with another child. I was 6 months pregnant with another child, and they told me to terminate the pregnancy. I was like, why would I terminate a 6-month pregnancy? And they said the baby has CF. And the reason it was 6 months was because they tested me. They saw something on the echogenic bowel, and then they decided to test me. And in the testing, they saw it was called an echogenic bowel. Then they tested me for my blood. Then they tested my husband for his blood. Then they tested the fetus. So we lost 6 weeks. I don't think they do that anymore. I think Mallory's case, or that baby's case, was sort of a watershed moment because they realized, okay, this was dumb. We could have just done it faster. But for me personally, that's how we happened to learn about Mallory, because I said, I think Mallory has this disease. She was 3 years old at the time, and I insisted she be tested. And they kept saying, no, 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 no. But that whole experience testing the fetus led to me testing Mallory. And I think faster diagnostics at that point would have really helped us a lot emotionally. I mean, it was traumatic to terminate a 6-month pregnancy, and I really didn't want to. And it was horrible.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Vanji. I as a diagnostic researcher myself, I often struggle with this idea of accuracy of diagnostics versus providing information in the absence of information, right? So your story is a good one. There's a lot of pushback from the technical fields of we want our accuracy to be, maximum 99% accurate. But the problem that you mentioned is something we should all think about very carefully, because the absence of any test is 0% accuracy, and it has real world immediate implications. So thank you for your question, Vanji, and Diane. Your discussion is really interesting.
I will say it's very nice when you give a talk to have somebody reveal themselves so I can see a real person. There's a lot of names, and it's nice to see a face. So thank you.
Likewise. Thank you very much. So we have about 10 more minutes or 15 more minutes before we are on schedule for our next speaker. If anyone has any questions, we can bring those to Diane and discuss.
And I'll put my name in the chat. If anybody has a question, they can email me.
Permission of Diane about your story, Diane, because the GARD, part of GARD is the AMR diagnostics. Is it okay to use the recorded story and use it for our presentations, future presentations, to draw? Because the problem with AMR, and I have been doing AMR for many years now, it's a real problem, it's a global problem, but it's hard to put a face.
Yeah.
Hard to put a face. So it's very hard to convince people, because it's different from, say, an infectious disease where, let's say diarrhea, where you get the diarrhea the next day or the same day, right? Whereas
Yep.
AMR like takes over years, and also it's hard to say like this activity led to DMR. It is very hard to connect,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we know that it's overuse, misuse, and so on, but it's very hard to connect. So I thought your story would help us connect the problem, the activities, and the need to develop AMR. Is that okay if we can use your story?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, I'm just putting in the chat, I'm putting in the 2-minute trailer. So it's funny because I had this literally this horrible thing happen. The presentation I actually prepared for your group was different.
Mhm.
And I printed out the talk, I was all ready to go and I lost the presentation. I have no idea where it is. So this is actually a different presentation, but that's okay. They're all they're all interchangeable technically. But I was a little flustered in the beginning. And so if you want me to
seem to be getting worse.
that, oh,
Sorry
sorry.
about that.
I think, yeah, maybe somebody pressed it. Anyway, I'm happy to re-record it because it was a little bit off in the beginning. And I'm also happy to speak. And I'm also happy for you to use the book. And I'm also happy for you to use the film or the trailer or anything. So you have the website with those resources. But I speak all the time because I do know that there has been a missing voice in AMR. And I do know that Mallory, between her book, her documentary, and my talk, it does make it seem real. When you meet a person, you see a person.
Mhm.
And I just came from Australia where we did 5 screening events, one in Perth, Sydney, Adelaide, Brisbane, and Melbourne. And we screened the documentary in a theater, and then we had a panel afterwards because the documentary evokes emotion the way a talk does. And then we brought in all the experts and we talked all about, in one place it was phage therapy, in another place it was AMR, in another place it was diagnostics, in another place it was the biofilm. I learned a lot about the biofilm. And so, yes, you are welcome to use her story in any way. And like I said, I don't benefit financially. I make sure all of it goes to this research fund, and we give money for compassionate use. We made the inaugural grant to the IPATH trial that Stephanie's doing. In Mallory's lifetime, I raised $5.5 million. And since then I've raised more than $500,000 since she passed away. And it all goes 100% to research and trials and compassionate use.
To the AMR problem.
You have my email there. Feel free to reach out at any point.
Yes, thank you so much. And
I should tell you that next month I'm going to speak to NATO, and I'm also going to speak to members of the European Union. And one of the issues that NATO is looking at is the international security threat. And one of the things the European Union is looking at is how to fund more treatments, because we need more money to tackle these problems. That's one of the things I've learned in my journey, how many different groups need money to either run their trial or to do compassionate use or to put their, teams of people into research. And a lot of postdocs and PhD students at the basic science level from the major institutions, Harvard, Stanford, Yale, with huge endowments, reach out to me and ask me if I can raise money for them. And I'm thinking, why are these universities not funding this research? But across the board in every area, lack of funding is a problem. And there is legislation that's pending now. It's called the Pasteur Act. It's bipartisan, and they're only signing members of Congress on in pairs. And the point is to get the government to invest in antibiotics, antifungals, phage therapy, and diagnostics.
thank you. Thank you. Carry the torch.
Thank you, Dan. And I just wanted to make more of a comment than a question, which is your presentation was absolutely spectacular. And I wanted to note that you thought that the slides were a
Oh
bit
my God, I was like, it was terrible. I also was using this mouse, and I realized I don't usually use the mouse. I use the button, and a couple of them were off, and I was like, oh, because I'm an anal perfectionist. I was like, oh God, it wasn't perfect.
No, I mean, from the audience side, it was compelling and just wonderful. But I also wanted to use that as an opportunity to mention to myself and to all of our audience that storytelling and speaking is really important. And it's not something that as researchers and scientists that we're necessarily trained to do. And we're kind of hyper focused on STEM these days in our curricula. Chelsea can speak a lot to that, but in the work that she's doing to bridge those two gaps. But I just want to say, especially to younger students that are in the pipeline, please do everything you can to go out of your way and learn communication, also empathy, get in touch with your feelings and learn how to express them publicly in a serious way. I thought your talk was just absolutely breathtaking in that way, Diane. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
My pleasure. And if you ever want me to give it again, I'm happy to.
I think we would love it.
Diane, thank you for the offer. I was just about to ask you that we would be reaching out to you to give us talk on convincing, not necessarily on the funding side, but even convincing researchers to go into that field.
Well, hopefully that's the point, that you tell a story. By the way, are you guys in Michigan?
Yes.
I'm coming to Michigan for one day to give a talk on May 6th, I think it is. I don't know where you guys are, but I would love to say hello.
In East Lansing, we would love to meet you. Maybe we can.
I'm going to Detroit. Is that anywhere near East Lansing?
About 1.5 hours away. Yeah, let us know, please. Here's my email. I would love to host you at MSU, Michigan State University.
Oh, wow. If we can, we'll talk offline. If we can make it work, I would be happy to come.
Yes.
And if I can't do it, if it doesn't work that day, I can do it on Zoom, which works really well too.
Yes, we can organize something, please.
Okay.
Right, let me know.
By the way, for all of the people who are not speaking and I'm not looking at, are they doctors or students or postdocs? Who is the audience here?
We have a mix. I can see a few colleagues who are professors. I also recognize a few names of students. So I think we're a blend across the spectrum.
It's wonderful that you exist. And by the way, if any of you ever want to talk to the people at BioMaru, I'll connect you there if you don't know them, because they are really huge and committed, and maybe you could do something together.
Yes, please let us, introduce us to them. We'll be glad to work with them in this area.
Yeah, it seems like it's very aligned.
Yes. Thank you.
And we did have one question. I'd like to just take a moment and take that question before we close here. So one question from Chelsea was, can you speak to any of the current phage therapy research that's ongoing now and what they're specifically working on? Have you witnessed anything in your talks or in your discussions with others?
Well, I know that when Mallory received her phages, there was no formal center, and now Yale, San Diego, Baylor, and and Mayo are all doing they have formal phage programs. UPMC is doing a lot of work. Stanford is doing some work. Harvard is doing some work. So it's exciting that many people, and there are constantly phage forums with more people getting involved. I actually, before this talk, which is part of why I was so flustered, I did an interview with Wired magazine because they are working on a story. Is it finally time for phages? Because, when Mallory got her phages, nobody was paying any attention. Nobody cared. Stephanie, who you heard from this morning, has been such an important researcher, communicator, spokesperson, advocate, and she and I work together a lot. As a matter of fact, she wrote the afterword to Mallory's book. And actually, I'm going to read you the first line she wrote, which I thought was really great. It's the postscript, and she says, "I never had a daughter, but if I had, I would want her to be just like Mallory. People might find it strange that we never actually met, spoke, emailed, or texted. That's because the first time I heard about Mallory was when she needed phages." So but she went on to write a really lovely piece.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
We have developed a rapid nanotechnology-based biosensor for rapidly detecting carbapenem-resistant bacteria.
Oh, okay. Is carbapenem related to meropenem?
Yes, they're the same group.
Yeah, that's what.
Imipenem, carbapenem is the broader name, and You have the imipenem, meropenem, imipenem. So those are all, and we have developed a rapid test for that we can detect the DNA, the presence of the drug-resistant genes in about 3 hours.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. So that's we have published our papers, and we have those, we have that technology available for further research, for moving on forward to application if there is an opportunity for us to do that.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
So you may feel free to inform.
Okay.
Biomer-
Oh, yeah.
or-
You, and I put my email in thing. Will you send me an email so I can introduce you?
I will do that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Vanchi. Okay, so if there are no further questions, let's please, if you're able to use your virtual reactions button, please join me again in virtually thanking Ms. Diane Smith for a wonderful and captivating talk. It was really moving. I'm going to watch the documentary again. It brought me to tears, but happy and hopeful tears. And I'm definitely looking forward to getting a copy of the book as well. So I'll reach out to distributors and pick up a copy.
Thank you.
Would like to, how do we get, is there a potential for like bulk discount if we make?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the paperback costs 18, and if you buy it in bulk, it's like $10. And there's, yes, I can definitely put you in touch with people to do that.
So I will send you an email if we can
Okay.
get like bulk discount. Thank you.
Yeah, they definitely do
Yeah.
that.
That's a great idea, Vanji. Please keep us posted if we can jump in on that.
Mhm.
Great. Okay, thank you very much,
And by the
Diane.
way, I'm going to put one more thing into the chat because I do want you to see this. It's important to me.
Okay.
Actually, I'm not going to put it in the chat. I'm just going to share my screen for 1 second to show you this because I think it's really important. Are you looking at my screen now?
Mhm.
So it's called the California Community Foundation. And it's as you see down here, it's a vetted nonprofit that I have nothing to do with. And we raise money, and all the proceeds in perpetuity from anything related to Salt My Soul go here. And as you'll see, we support the Center for, IPATH, Center for Innovative Phage Applications and Therapeutics. We support Yale with Dr. Paul Turner and Dr. Ben Chan. We also support others. We just haven't put it up there, but all of it goes to really important work. So you can feel good if you end up buying anything, because it does also go to a good cause.
Great. Thank you so much. And I dug up the link to your screenshot and pasted in the chat if anyone would like a copy of that.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to share Mallory's story, to raise awareness for phage therapy and AMR. And also in your case, diagnostics is important. That's something new to me, but I now understand it's a whole part of the equation. And it really actually is sort of like at the beginning, like you need to be talking about diagnostics before you talk about anything else. So I didn't know that until the fall.
Likewise. Thanks again, Diane, and thanks everyone for your time. We will take just a brief pause before introducing the next speaker. Thank you for your questions, Vanchi.
Thank you, Eric.
Okay, so for those of you who are with us, I'm gonna wait just maybe a minute or so until 1:25. I think we'll start the video a few minutes early. Our next speaker was not able to attend the first half of the portion in person, so he created a video for us, which I'll be sharing. And then for the last 10 minutes of his talk, which is the third portion of our North America session, we'll have a Q&A and our speaker will be joining us at that time. I'll just give another minute or so in case anyone wants to join in, and then we'll get started. Okay, thank you all for attending our North America GARD session today. We're going to go ahead and get started with our third speaker, our third and final speaker of the day. And our speaker this afternoon is Dr. Vazal, and I'm going to let him introduce a little bit of the details about his background because he does that in the beginning of his video. But I will mention he completed his veterinary training at Iowa State University and received a master's of public health at the University of Iowa. So his scholarly work and research focuses on antimicrobial resistance, One Health, and gender equity. So Dr. Vazal was previously president of the International Student One Health Alliance. If you've heard of this organization, it's a wonderful one to be engaged with if you're a student or a faculty member. They do a lot of work in building capacity for youth in One Health globally. So I am going to share my screen and let Dr. Vazal introduce some of the other details of his background. He has about a 20-minute pre-recorded video that he's made for us. And then we will pause and welcome Dr. Vazal in person to take any questions. Please feel free to use the chat function, or if you prefer to use Google, we can make sure that Dr. Vazal sees those questions. Chelsea, if you could just quickly confirm that you hear the audio once I start this, I would appreciate it.
Hello all, my name is Neil Vazal.
Can you hear the audio, Chelsea?
Yes, I can.
Great, okay. Pardon me, I'm just gonna start over and I'll let the video play, thank you.
Brief background about myself. I am a veterinarian by training. I currently work with the USDA on the Hawaiian Islands. I am a supervisory public health veterinarian with the Food Safety and Inspection Service, or FSIS for short. We're going to briefly start out by going over what antimicrobials are. Basically, they are any variety of substances that are used to treat or prevent infection by an infectious agent. That includes antibiotics and antibacterials, which target bacteria, antivirals for viruses, antifungals for fungi, and antiparasitics for parasites. However, what we will be focusing on today are bacteria and antibiotics. But just know that antimicrobials compose or can refer to all of these different substances. Some other terms we'll be using today. So you saw AM stands for antimicrobials. AMU is antimicrobial use. AMR is antimicrobial resistance, and OH stands for One Health, which refers to the intersection of human, animal, and environmental health. And you'll see why that's so important by the end of this lecture today. So what is antimicrobial resistance? So some of you may have heard in previous coursework or just life, about Darwinian evolution, survival of the fittest, or Darwinian selection. And what that basically is, and what it pertains to antimicrobial resistance, is that whenever you basically put some kind of insult onto a population, or some kind of noxious stimuli, and end up killing some of them off, if any survive and survive due to a heritable characteristic, then they can pass that on and basically breed a population that is stronger and more resistant to that noxious stimuli. If that noxious stimuli is an antimicrobial, and if that population is bacteria or some other microbe, then you have antimicrobial resistant microbes or bacteria in this example. And that's spurs on the problem that we're talking about today. So how are antimicrobials used and where? Most importantly, for humans at least, they are used in human medicine. They are used to treat and prevent infection. On occasion, they'll be improperly prescribed, or perhaps even more than on occasion. Or perhaps there's a viral infection or a probable viral infection, and an antibiotic is prescribed, or something to that effect. That's not terribly uncommon. It's not uncommon in animal medicine either, in which case treatment or prevention of infection is also the ultimate goal. However, in animals, you can also use antimicrobials to promote growth. That is to say, it's an economic use of a drug, and it will basically increase the efficiency or the rate of gain or just the rate of growth of an animal. And so it's used for economic agricultural purposes in some contexts because of that. It's also used to prevent infection and prevent food spoilage in a variety of crop agricultural and other agricultural contexts. This just pairs up different, or estimations at least, of antimicrobial use across different animal and human domains and species in the past several years, and also predictions for the coming decade or so. You can see that pigs really kind of eclipse everything else. Humans are in gray, and we'll be talking about why animal use on the whole is so much higher than in humans, as can be seen here. Crop agriculture uses substantially less antimicrobials than in human or veterinary medical context. Probably about 1% of total animal use, though the estimates vary widely. One reason it's so ill-characterized is that a lot of the reason that we do try and characterize or do research on this sort of thing in the first place is because of its at least supposed application to human public health. It's a bit anthropocentric like that. However, plants and humans don't really share nearly as many pathogens with each other as do animals and humans, or non-human animals and humans. So that's why veterinary medicine typically gets a lot more focus than plant health when looking at antimicrobial resistance. Though we are starting to understand to a higher degree how exactly those crop agricultural characteristics and uses come into play. This just helps break down kind of where and how much the antimicrobial use that we see on the earth is spread across different types of biomass. As you can see, plants are really the lion's share of biomass on the earth. However, the context in which antimicrobials will typically be applied to them are a very small percentage, though that small percentage of plants across the earth still is greater than animal and livestock, or human and livestock biomass combined, as can be seen here. Livestock is also bigger than human biomass, or on a biomass basis, which is why livestock use is such an important thing to monitor. One other thing we want to consider is pet biomass in addition to livestock biomass, so companion animals like cats and dogs. We don't really know the exact biomass of those aggregate creatures across the earth, really let alone what amount of antimicrobials they are using across the earth. So that's an emerging area of research at this point in time. We're also going to look at in addition to on a per biomass basis, how antimicrobials are used across the surface of the earth to sort of add perspective to the magnitude of the problem. So about 30% of the earth is land. About 71% of that 30% is habitable land, and about half of that is used for agriculture. Most of that is going to be used as pasture land for livestock, and then a bit less than a quarter of that's going to be used for crops. You can see those crops here in orange. Those are going to be in river basins, or basically along watersheds there where you have arable land that can yield crops basically that can be transported along waterways. That's pretty important because it also creates a scenario in which you get a lot of agricultural runoff of antimicrobials. That's pretty important because then you can see a lot of antimicrobials aggregating in waterways and even getting into coastal waters. So this is just antimicrobial consumption across the globe in humans, and this is on a dosage per capita basis. You don't need to pay attention to the numbers or to the specific metrics too much, just pay attention to the relative amount. You can see that for now, use is higher in more or less richer countries, so like North America, Europe. However, the rate of increase of uses is the highest in poorer countries or low and middle income countries, developing regions. And I'm not sure exactly when we might see them eclipse the global north, so to speak, in terms of use on a per capita basis, at least. But the trend is that use is kind of plateauing on a per capita basis in the global north and is still on the rise, very much so, in the global south. So as far as animal AMU, animal antimicrobial use, you see basically some trends across that correlate with what we're looking at with cropland, what we're looking at with lots of animal production in developing regions. You can see a ton of use going on in East Asia, in South Asia, and Southeast Asia, and a pretty substantial amount of use as well in areas of the global north that also just have a lot of animal food production. So like Europe, North America, and we certainly don't want to forget the kind of Amazon River basin around Brazil as well. So this is the list of WHO priority pathogens and what you would call bug-drug combinations that are of highest concern. We're not going to look at each individual one and have you memorize them or anything, but there's some clear trends here that we want to kind of get a hold of. One of the biggest ones is just the kinds of resistances that we're seeing, or to the classes of drugs to which there are resistances. A big one is beta-lactams, so that's like penicillins and carbapenems, cephalosporins. Another one you see is resistances to fluoroquinolone are of concern and rising, as well as glycopeptides like vancomycin and macrolides too. Another really big important trend here is that at least experimentally, and oftentimes just as a common zoonotic pathogen, you see these bacteria able to spread between animals and humans. So this is relative AMR abundance in humans. So we're moving on to AMR now, basically from AMR global statistics from AMU global statistics. This isn't really on a specific scale, it's just relative abundance. To pay attention basically to the darker colors, that's where you see more and more resistance. And again, that really does kind of hover around the global south in this case. Another good way to try and quantify the magnitude of antimicrobial resistance globally is the amount of economic loss you see from it. It's estimated that between 2014 at least and 2050, we'll see an excess of $100 trillion lost to antimicrobial resistance. That's just due to lost productivity, hospital costs, and the like. So where is AMR in animal health? One thing that we want to understand before we dig much more into this question is, where are economies growing? And this is just a brief visualization of GDP growth across the world. The darker blue countries are, generally speaking, where we're going to see larger economic growth. And with that brings higher and higher demand for animal protein foods or animal source foods. And you can see those kind of relative amounts of production here. East Asia really does take the cake as far as overall production. Lots of pigs being brought up there as well as chickens too. And this basically is all to say that animal production has been growing substantially over the past several decades and has been a huge driver of increased antimicrobial use across the world. And you can see that particularly in these emerging BRICS economies, or Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. You see a lot more production of livestock animals. And kind of correspondingly, in those regions, you see a lot of antimicrobial resistance taken from point prevalence surveys. And this is a 2019 study from Van Bokel et al. And it is one of the few studies that really puts together where we're seeing antimicrobial resistance, at least in the global south for this study. This takes us to how does AMR spread throughout the environment? This is a concept map of how AMR spreads from a variety of sectors, be those living or non-living environmental domains, if you will. One of the main ways to kind of conceptualize how antimicrobial resistance, antimicrobials themselves, antimicrobial resistance genes spread through the environment is they are largely consumed by, again, humans and livestock and pets to a degree that we're not totally sure. But especially with livestock and humans, we have these systematized, well, I guess systems of conveying sewage or sludge or basically just waste that contains a lot of these antimicrobially resistant bacteria, antimicrobially resistant genes, and also undigested or unmetabolized antimicrobials themselves, and conveys those all across the environment wherever those sewage systems lead to. A lot of times that can lead into waterways, or in the case of, particularly on livestock, soil. So you have those fairly massive environmental reservoirs potentially that then can be picked up, or where then crop agriculture or wildlife, any variety of other creatures or life on this earth can pick up those antimicrobial resistant bacteria or so on and so forth. This just goes a little bit more into environmental sources of, or environmental reservoirs at least, of antimicrobial resistance. One important thing to consider is that the soil contains basically half of all microbial biomass on the earth, so that can be a significant reservoir of anything that has to do with microbes. Sewage is pretty substantial in magnitude, as was shown in the previous chart, previous concept map. Humans and animals combined produced 4 trillion tons of feces in 2014, and 80% of that was from animals. Again, they make a larger amount of biomass than we do. So the kind of $1 million question is, how much does antimicrobial use in a variety of non-human sectors at least contribute to antimicrobial resistance, or at least clinically relevant conditions that are antimicrobial resistant in humans? One of the main areas of the world that has really taken on this question is Europe. And there's some emerging research globally that tries to tackle this question, but the most robust information that we have right now is from Europe. And basically these charts speak to the discovered, or I guess now known, correlation between antimicrobial use in animals and livestock specifically, and antimicrobial resistance in clinical, like hospital isolates from human populations across Europe. And those just show the trend lines as well as their confidence interval. So now we're going to jump into what efforts globally are being taken against antimicrobial resistance. This is just kind of a list of important events in basically One Health antimicrobial resistance regulation. and just other events, including the discovery of a variety of antimicrobials across time. Significantly, in 1969, there was an emerging. That's when people basically started to really suspect in earnest that there might be some connection between antimicrobial use in livestock and resistance in human populations. And then mostly through Europe, throughout the next several decades, you would start to see a couple different bans or just other restrictions on antimicrobial use in livestock, particularly in, again, that growth promotion context we discussed a little ways back. That's been kind of one of the big things that regulations have tried to strip back globally over the years, is using antimicrobials for growth promotion. There's a big push to only try and use it for medically important purposes, or for purposes important to the welfare of that animal. But that's still an ongoing effort at this point in time. So we basically see that kind of wave of attention kind of sweeping across different regions of the world, kind of making its way into the United States as far as a regulatory concern in the 20 teens, and then even further restrictions in 2022 being implemented in the EU. One of the big bodies that really helps, big global organizations that really helps to coordinate One Health and antimicrobial resistance action at this point in time is known as the One Health quadripartite. That is basically a systematized, a system of cooperation between the World Health Organization, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, the United Nations Environment Program, as well as the World Organization for Animal Health, previously known as OIE. And they basically get together and conjure a variety of programming and try and get the world on the same page as to what the situation is regarding antimicrobial resistance, antimicrobial use, as well as what we're going to do about it. One of those things that we are going to do about it, or that many people are doing about it, is implementing what are known as AMR national action plans. And these are things that are, the World Health Organization has made a kind of template for what kinds of action various countries might want to be taking on antimicrobial resistance, including just like decreasing use, just a variety of programming initiatives and how to coordinate on that. And then various countries across the globe have globbed onto some of those initiatives that the WHO has set forward, or to kind of set out themselves to make their own national action plans. And you can see the majority of countries have created and began implementing those here. And some have even made two, and those are the ones in black. In addition to those plans, there's a lot of different antimicrobial resistance and use surveillance networks. The biggest one is called GLASS, and that's operating at the global level and sort of mediated by WHO. And there's also regional networks that are also largely helped out by the WHO. And then there's also many national and even some subnational networks that exist. So what can we do? Any variety of health workers can play a direct role in this issue. One of the biggest things, that's probably the two biggest things that can possibly be done to help fight antimicrobial resistance are what, from at least a kind of global north perspective, would seem like fairly basic meat potatoes kind of things. Those are vaccination and increasing WASH, or water, cleaner water, sanitation, and hygiene. And those are kind of just the basics basically of modern medicine, but not all places really have those. And those are basically hoping with the hopes of preventing infections, so then you can't have antimicrobial resistance if you don't have an infection in the first place. Client education to prevent overuse or misuse of antimicrobial is pretty big too. And then implementing healthcare hospital level systems to try and find where antimicrobials may be being improperly used and then decrease that, kind of nip it at the butt. Just to kind of tie things all together, AMR presents what may be considered an existential threat to us as perhaps even a species, some have said. However, this is also really an opportunity for us to come together across disciplines, across geographies, to work together on something that is truly a threat that affects us all. And actually, it's been termed antimicrobial resistance as the quintessential One Health issue. If you enjoy this presentation, you might also enjoy an upcoming textbook from which this heavily draws some themes, at least regarding its One Health chapter. And that is Global One Health and Infectious Diseases, an Interdisciplinary Practitioner's Guide. And that is forthcoming to be released this year. If you're an educator, check it out. If you're a student, you might want to tell your teachers to check it out. Thank you very much for your time. And with that, I'd be more than happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Vizot is here with us now. So thank you very much for your pre-recorded talk. It was very informative, and I'm looking in the chat to see if there's any questions from the audience. If you prefer to use Whova, we can also post your questions there. Let me just pause for a moment, Dr. Vizot, and see if any questions come in from the audience. If not, I'll read one from the online.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna take one from the online. I see a few popping in the chat here. So one question from an audience attendee is asking you about scientific groups nationally that anyone can engage with to either be involved with or learn more about AMR research. Can you speak a little bit to that? Perhaps the One Health Student Club or some other opportunities for students?
Yeah. So in the United States, probably one of the biggest organizations that would have much comment on this would be the Infectious Disease Society of America, or diseases. It's IDSA. So if you give them a Google and AMR, you can find out what all their work is. I'm not intimately familiar with all they do on the topic, but they're kind of the preeminent trade organization in the United States that has a hand in those issues. Do we have any audience from outside the United States, like perhaps Europe?
I think we do. I think we're fairly global here in terms of your attendees. So.
Oh, beautiful. Because in Europe you have ESCMID. I'm forgetting the exact order, and I don't even remember the exact name. But they do put out like a variety of webinars and have a variety of materials that again are kind of sets them as the preeminent trade type organization in Europe that has work in AMR.
Wonderful.
As far as other, As far as other continents, I'm not totally sure.
Great. And can students engage, say, if a student is in a country in Africa or maybe in Latin America, can they engage with the One Health Student Society that you talked about in your bio?
Oh, yes, absolutely. There's a variety of, so first of all, you want to follow ESOHA on social media is going to be the biggest thing to know what and when is happening. I'm a trustee myself right now, so I'm not involved in every little bit of the operations as I once was, but that will be the primary gateway into getting involved.
Wonderful.
And then that'll be able to help you pinpoint where exactly the current clubs that we have in our network are, and you can connect with them.
Great. Thanks so much. That's really helpful. So we have a few other questions I'd like to read from the chat box here. So one question is asking if you could articulate how rapid diagnostics or the lack of rapid diagnostics in your experience plays a role in AMR. Yeah,
so just broadly speaking, the rapid diagnostics really help to advance past empiric treatment. Typically you're treating along the lines of clinical signs and symptoms, and then if your hospital hasn't implemented or your health system hasn't implemented, you might have an antibiogram to say what your most likely infectious agent is most likely to be resistant to. So then you're dealing with two layers of uncertainty there. And so you can just really peel back that time that you might be using improper or just not the best treatment, and basically spurring on further antimicrobial resistance. The literature on that topic is something I want to dive a little bit more into in the future, but those are kind of the broad strokes of it.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
Yeah.
that really speaks up. There's another question coming in, which popped up in the news yesterday for us here locally, asking about antifungal resistance. Is that common? Is it something that you see regularly?
Great question. So one thing, one disparity, I guess you could say, between what the WHO has prioritized as priority pathogens and the United States is having Candida auris as a priority pathogen. And am I correct in saying that that is the fungal agent that's kind of sweeping through the United States right now?
I believe so. Chelsea, you can chime in, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. Or I will not, but we know what it is, so that's good. And the United States, sort of in opposition, or not, in dissimilarity to the WHO, and I believe the EU as well, has Candida auris listed as a effectively a priority pathogen for antimicrobial resistance. So the epidemiology of that is not something I understand incredibly well, I would say. Like I don't know what the sort of prevalence of it is at this point in time, and where it's expanding and why. But basically, what I can tell you is that the United States has listed this as a priority pathogen, or whatever its equivalent is, and other regions and even at the global level, it has not been listed as such.
Interesting. I have a follow-up question related to that, and I don't have any technical expertise, so consider my question as from a person in a coffee shop. So in terms of, you talked about the zoonotic potential for some of the other organisms, but in terms of fungal, is there also a zoonotic potential, or is it strictly in the sort of the fecal route?
Yes, I believe you see Candida auris in animals as well. It's I haven't heard of it personally as a major zoonotic threat, at least, but it's just one of the many things that can live on kind of broadly mammals, and
Interesting.
even some animals outside of that, I believe.
Interesting.
Mhm.
So continuing there's a lot of curiosity about these antifungals that we're hearing about on the news. And so there's a question about, if I understand the question correctly, it's really speaking to the geographic and spatial diversity of the US and trying to figure out a way to diagnose something like Candida antifungal resistance, given all of the geographic diversity and landscape diversity. Do you see that playing a role in antifungal more or less than other types of AMR?
I'm gonna say that I honestly do not know. I'm not familiar enough with that specific topic to, I think, make a very scholarly comment on it. I apologize.
No, I appreciate it. I may have misinterpreted the question, but I used to live in Florida where everything has fungus on it. So this is part of
Oh,
where.
same deal in Hawaii. It's yeah.
Okay, so we have about 1 more minute if anyone has a burning question for Dr. Vizot. I'll try to translate that through the Huga app or chat. If not, in the meantime, please use your virtual reaction buttons and join me in thanking Dr. Rizzo for a great talk. We really appreciate it, and it was really moving. Thank you for sharing the link as well. Are you okay if we share that YouTube video with others through our network in GARD?
Oh, absolutely. I can make it public if you want, if it makes it easier.
That would be wonderful. I think it's really insightful, and I really appreciate all of the references and literature overviews that you did. It was very nice.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. Aloha and have a wonderful time.
Yep. Aloha.
Thank you everyone for attending a North America session. We really appreciate your attention and time. I'll pass to Vanjie and Chelsea, who may want to let us know what's coming in the schedule. I believe it's the Oceania.
For the speakers, on behalf of GARD, we really want to express our gratitude for your time in the presentation. And for those who are here, thank you for attending. And thank you, Eric, for moderating the session extremely well, and Chelsea for organizing this session as well. So with that, our session is Oceania from 6 to 7 p.m. EST. So we look forward to seeing you over there. Eric, you're the moderator there, so we'll see you too.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a nice
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Eric.
Very welcome. Thank you, Chelsea.